been thinking a lot about drugs lately. And the reason that I say this is because I've seen a lot of people act like if you oppose the usage of drugs in any way, then you're like trying to control people. And I don't mean that I necessarily oppose it, but I've certainly seen the way that it's affected people in my life. Like, I've known... People will call me a hypocrite for this too, because I've talked before about how I have to smoke weed to sleep, right? But that's because of medical issues. It was between weed and Ambien, and I mean, I chose the one that doesn't make you say the N-word. But pretty much everybody that I tend to have this conversation with gets extremely offended when I suggest that reducing their consumption of drugs would improve their psychological condition. And what I've also found in my life is this is the same exact reaction I get when I tell people to... I don't tell them, I suggest to them that maybe it would be a good idea that they're not, shit-faced drunk all the time. Or that maybe beating their meat to porn more often than they brush their teeth is probably not very good for their view of women and their view of themselves. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of opposition now to the concept of moderation. Let me give you an example for me, right? Like, before I started smoking weed, I was very anti-weed because I had seen it fuck up a couple people's lives, and they ended up being at least different people than I knew them as after they started making a big habit out of it. And I begrudgingly started smoking weed, mainly because I had horrible insomnia, and I would literally stay up for like 4 days, and then I'd sleep for like 4 hours, and then I'd stay up for like 3 more days, and it was just really unhealthy. It's why I'm only 5'11". Should be taller than I am. I'm kind of bitter. But anyway, I begrudgingly started smoking weed, and the entire time I kind of had in my mind that, like, concern over whether or not it would mess with my performance or with my clarity, right? And I'm very fortunate in the sense that also I do use it in moderation, but I mean, I'm very fortunate that it hasn't negatively affected me. But I've been around in my day quite a few people who use it a little bit more than me, and I've never seen anything good come from that. I'm not just talking about weed here, I'm talking about any drug. I'll go into a couple more in a little bit, but when people do the age-old argument where they're like, oh, well, like, alcohol ruins lives, but weed just, like, makes you chill out. Not true. It's not. Weed ruins your life in a much more subtle way, where what was once an ambitious, bright person now becomes a complacent idiot, basically. Or they become... I like to call this pleasure poisoning, the title of this episode. It's kind of like a too much of a good thing sort of situation, but when you make everything comfortable for yourself, when you remove yourself from reality and you don't make a point of being uncomfortable sometimes, you stunt your growth completely, and that's what weed does. Nothing worries me more in a person than when they tell me that they wake and bake every day or something. And they go, well, like, I wake and bake, but I still get this done, and then... I'm not, like, this is not me talking about judging anybody, but I mean, like, they go, well, I wake and bake and I still get my work done and shit like that, but it's like, yeah, but what other areas of your life are suffering? Like, you know what I mean? And this is something that I would never bring up to somebody, obviously, but other areas of their life are suffering. It's, in order to be, as far as I'm concerned, a functional adult in the world, you have to be aware and conscious of the things that you are responsible for all the time and take ownership for them. And I mean, there's something to be said for whatever, like escapism and things like that, but at the same time, what are you running away from? And does running away from that make it any better? I sound like a fucking loser when I say this, but it's like when they taught us this in school where they're like, look, if you fucking, whatever, like drink, for example, now you've just wasted a lot of time and you're hungover and you still have those problems. You know what I mean? And Oh, it's hard to not use any actual examples. The people that tend to have this problem are incapable of realizing that they have a problem because they've lost their reference point. I don't, like, again, people call me a hypocrite for this, but I say this from the bottom of my heart. The people that do this sort of thing lose their grip on reality in the sense that either they feel like they're getting a lot of work done when they're not, or it's the sort of thing where, like, if you can't trust somebody who does this sort of thing because they can only really pay attention to what is right in front of their nose, in my experience, where they lack the forethought, they lack thinking ahead. They're thinking of, okay, how do I get through this day or get through whatever I'm doing right now so I can smoke weed? It becomes like the thing that's like their release. Usually, like in life, when you're going through something difficult, you will like try and keep your world small and you like try to make it to lunch or something. Like you're having a bad day and you go, oh, it's fine. Like I just have to make it to lunch, right? But if you habitually smoke weed all the time, what you end up doing is weed becomes your lunch in this case, right? Where it's that thing that you're looking forward to get through everything. And then your actual real life that you should be appreciating and enjoying becomes the task that you're trying to avoid and skip through, right? Like you only have so much time that you're alive, and it's really a pity to not be able to remember it. This is coming from a guy who, like, I've said this before, I've smoked pretty much every day for the past 2 years, but I do it right before I go to bed so that I can sleep, right? This is just an observation I've seen in other people. And people tend to have the tendency to say, well, you know, like this one person I know does it all the time and they're successful. Joe Rogan smokes weed all the time and he's successful, so like I can do it too. And it's like, no, you can't. Like everybody's different. It's kind of like the same reason that some people become alcoholics and some people don't, right? Just because it works for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But for some reason, the people that like, I'm not being like, I'm the first to tell you, but I mean, pretty much everybody I know that smokes weed acts like this isn't the case and that it can never have any negatives because they're almost afraid of it affecting them. And you just have to be honest with yourself, is what I'm trying to say. If you're going to put a substance into your body, you have to be conscious of the fact that you are acting as a pharmacist for yourself. I stole that from somebody else for sure. Somebody else definitely said that. But you are prescribing yourself something. And a doctor that writes their own prescriptions, you know what happens. What I'm getting at here is that there's a kind of fundamental question that you need to ask yourself is do you think that you're alive to experience pleasure? Like, I don't, personally. I think that the pursuit of pleasure is one of the most evil things you can do. And I mean, you look at people like Jeffrey Epstein, right? What was his life about? His life was about feeling good. His life was about pleasure. And in my opinion, there's honestly, there's little more you could do to harm yourself than trap yourself into a situation where you're pleasure poisoned and you become addicted to feeling good, and any sort of sensation of discomfort sends you into like a little situation. You just can't handle any kind of conflict without a substance to help you manage it. And once you cross that bridge, it's very, very difficult to get back. Where it's almost, let me put it this way, sometimes ignorance is bliss, right? And if you don't smoke weed and you don't know what weed's like, guess what? You'll probably only want to smoke weed on the basis of curiosity. But if you develop that kind of psychological dependency to the point where you can't face conflict without becoming extremely anxious unless you're stoned, you just really fucked yourself. Like you really, it can't be overstated how much that is harmful to you and how much you will regret having done that to yourself when you look back on your life. And just because, this goes back to what I said before, just because you see like fucking people doing it and they seem like they're having a great time, which I'm sure they are, right? Just because you see people, whatever, that you look up to talking about it, doesn't mean that you need to do it. Like the only thing that I can tell you is that you need to be able to make that judgment call as to whether or not it's bad for you pretty soon after you start doing it, right? And if it's bad for you, you need to stop before it's too late. And if you can't make that decision, you shouldn't be using drugs, right? want to talk a little bit about MDMA real quick. Because I've known in my life quite a few people that did MDMA, and what I've noticed about them is, I'm not a psychologist or anything, obviously. I'm a high school dropout, if you can't tell. But what I've noticed about people that use MDMA is that they are utterly fried and they can't experience actual genuine love. I've seen this in multiple people, and when I say genuine love, I mean in the sense that they have their insecurities rule them. And the only time that they feel that release is when they're on this weird fucking love drug that makes you want to touch and love everybody. It seems like an unpleasant experience to me. But I've known probably 4 or 5 people, at least, that I can cite as being examples of this. And they always cheat on their significant other. They always wonder why they're not happy. And then they do this thing that burns out their dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin receptors, and then they feel miserable. And it's because you you don't want to desensitize yourself to love, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't really know where I'm going with this. All I'm saying is don't do MDMA based on my experience. Every single person I know that does MDMA is profoundly miserable, and then they don't know why. And this is the common link that I found. And I'm not talking about depressed. I know that this is always the hot topic here, but I mean, they develop this sort of dissociative element to their personality, and they like, let me put it this way. It blurs the distinction between physical love and emotional love, and in my opinion, it seems like it erases the emotional love component, and they can only associate love with physicality at that point. So they just jump from person to person to person, and they don't really... Let me put it this way. It makes them incapable of bonding with another person under normal circumstances. Because it's like building a tolerance to love. Does that sound like something that you want to do? I'm not being some anti-drug person. I'm just saying these are the positives and negatives that you need to weigh. I mean, I've seen countless videos on this site of dudes that look like this, and they're just like, you know, I did LSD like 10 times, and then I realized that like there's no good and evil, and that we're all God. And I want to define evil for you real quick. And what I would define evil as is, and evil is what happens to people when they become free of consequences, right? Like, you think about another question for you. Are the people who are in power often evil, either, 1, because they are attracted to power because they are evil, or do they become evil once they gain power? I think that it's the second one, based on my own life experiences. If we're talking hypotheticals, right? Not gonna name anybody, but speaking in hypotheticals, right? Hypothetically, let's say you were somebody who didn't have the best childhood, and then you started suddenly getting an influx of positive attention, right? This is, I'm not talking about drugs, but drugs basically fill the same role as this positive attention you have to see. It's all the endorphins, the oxytocin, this sort of thing, right? The undeserved reward is what I'm talking about. Evil is what happens when humans receive an undeserved reward, and then they become free of their consequences. This person who had a bad childhood, right, suddenly gets pleasure poisoned, and now they have everything. And nobody's telling them no, right? Do you think that person will exercise restraint? Do you think that person will be responsible? No, they won't. They'll act like a tyrant, right? Just look at Jeffrey Epstein.
Still feel like a 27.
You don't feel like you're...
I got stuck in a time loop at 27.
27 is a good time. But you said earlier, you said something about, you architected your life to be wealthy.
No, you may have misunderstood.
You,
I never thought of, I never sort of went after money. I don't think about money in that sense. I think now what I'm saying is once you have wealth, you have to think about your life.
I feel like what I'm getting at here is that pain is required in order to grow, and if you only ever seek pleasure if your priority becomes having fun for lack of a better word. I'm not saying life shouldn't be fun, but if that's your priority, if all you want is to ever feel pleasure, all you want is to just ever enjoy yourself, you never want to go through any pain, you never want to work yourself, you're never going to grow, you're going to completely stagnate, and I think you're probably going to come out a pretty evil person. At the very least, you'll come out poorly adjusted to the world and incapable of empathizing with other people. And this sounds harsh, but I mean, I'm saying it because it needs to be said. Like, there's... This goes back to a little bit about what I said about influencers and psyops, right? And, like, how they influence what you think about things. I just see, like, almost unilateral support of people being like, yeah, dude, like, weed, it's legal. And it's like... Everything in moderation. You can't just... Dude, if it wasn't bad for you, they wouldn't sell it. That's not how it works. Don't ever think that. Don't ever think that. Think about it this way. When I think it was Joe Rogan or somebody did this whole thing where they're like, yeah, dude, I did DMT, and these alien beings came down, and they were like, we are the pleasure monkeys, man. Like, that's what life's all about, right? If that's what life's all about, then go do heroin. If that's what life's all about, then fucking go sit down in the gutter, put a needle in your arm, shoot up, and feel the greatest pleasure you'll ever feel. That's what life's about, right? Is it? No, it very clearly isn't. Right? It very clearly is not about that. So, I don't know, what I'm saying is... almost spilled my beer. What I'm saying is, you gotta think for yourself. Don't fucking believe these weirdos on the internet that are all just like, oh yeah, you know, weed, man. Dude, you gotta open your mind, bro. Dude, you gotta open your mind. Just smoke fucking... Just spend all of your money on weed, dude. Don't forward yourself at all. Stagnate yourself in young adulthood, man. Fucking please. I'm not saying don't use drugs. Do whatever you want, but you just have to weigh the pros and cons. If you're a fucking kid, you fucking 18 years old, and somebody's like, oh yeah, this is gonna open your mind, man. You can't gain wisdom from substances, and I've never spoken to somebody that has done acid and told me something that they thought was profound that I hadn't either already considered it, or it was inherently just entirely illogical. Like the whole, there's no good and evil, man. You just gotta stop being judgmental. It's like, no, dude, if you fucking rape somebody, you're evil. Like, there's definitely not no such thing, right? It's just like, why would you even have to have that discussion? It's unbelievable to me, frankly. What I'm getting at is that your priority in life shouldn't be seeking pleasure. Your priority in life should be bettering yourself and building skills. Because if you don't do that, you're dead. You're nothing if you don't have any abilities, right? And smoking weed is not an ability, right? Fucking going to a fucking rave and doing a bunch of MDMA and then coming back and going, why can't I find love? Every time I get with somebody, I just feel the need to jump to the next person. I wonder why you do that. It's almost like you've burned out your love. But what I'm getting at here is, I'm not telling you not to use drugs, but what I am telling you is to weigh the consequences of doing so. Because if they're going to get in the way of your development, and you're not going to be able to stop them, and you don't have the wherewithal and the discipline to stop doing something that harms you, you're going to fuck up your life, right? Just because it's a plant that comes from the ground doesn't mean it's not going to fuck up your life. You know what else is a plant that comes from the ground? Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's good for you. I'm not trying to tell you what to think about this sort of stuff, as per usual. I'm just trying to tell you to think about it. Consider it. Thanks for watching.